Namaste. So it's a joy to be back in Noida from my trip to the U.S. Everybody's asked me about the trip, and of course the most common thing that people want to know about is the wedding. Wedding's a big deal. So my son was married, and it went very well, and his wife is super nice, super nice, and it was an interesting next generation expression, because they both grew up in Ananda, but they don't live in Ananda. They live in Washington State, and they have careers, and they're busy, and many of their friends grew up in Ananda. So I would say, there was at least 30% or more of the people at the wedding, which was about maybe 100 plus people, maybe 120 people, had lived for extended periods of time at Ananda Village. But, and some were still living there, but most were not. And the ceremony was led by Nayaswami Vijay and Nirmala, who many of you know. And they are the godparents of Kristen, the bride. So they have special reason to be there as well. So the ceremony had a blending of a little bit of Ananda style, and a little bit of, which includes Indian, walking around the fire, except it's a candle, not an actual fire. And then they say their own vows. They come, and they really did it very different. It's not uncommon for couples to make up their own vows, but they did it in such a way that it was quite different. And some of it was funny, and I didn't memorize it, so I can't quote it. But it was very reflective of the feeling that they have. They grew up with the belief that they can live the way they want to live, and that they can express life the way they want to express it, and that there's no, they don't have to fit the conventions of the past, but it's not that they disrespect them. It's just that they don't feel bound by them. And I think that that's very reflective of the times in which we live. We have to learn to free ourselves from the past. That doesn't mean we forget it. It doesn't mean we don't learn from it. It doesn't mean that we disrespect it. But it means that we don't feel bound by it. That we bring the old ways, you might say, into fresh modern expression. And this is what Yoganandaji described as the path of self-realization. When he was asked, is this a new religion? He said, no, it's a new expression. And we know that God's nature is ever new. When a religion becomes too firm, it's dead. It's no longer living. You have to have new growth, new expression, ever newness. That doesn't mean the truths change. Love doesn't stop being an essential truth. It just means that we learn to express it in ever new ways. So I found the wedding to be inspiring in that regard, not so inspiring in regard to the folks who were tipping the glass. It was vegetarian, but it was they did allow alcohol. So clearly I'm not in control of the situation. But there was another thing that happened during my trip that was I'm just saying was important to me, and that was 10 days at Ananda Village for Spiritual Renewal Week. And spending that time in the village, anybody who's been there knows that it's just a fantastic environment. And over the years, when we first purchased the property over 45 years ago, it was basically forest. There was almost nothing there. And now there's beautiful homes, and the area has been opened up, and the brush has been cleared underneath the trees. It looks like a park, a beautiful park. And in the park, you see animals. You see, the deer are all over the place. Deer, and there's wild turkeys. And I saw a cougar, which is, no, not a cougar, a fox. And which I had never seen in the area before. And anyway, it's just a beautiful place, but it's permeated with a sense of peaceful well-being. And then of course the program for the week, where there's classes every morning, and then different activities in the afternoons, and then an evening program, and it just builds this momentum of God is present, God is alive, God is joy. It's really beautiful. And on Thursday of the week, I was invited to speak for 15 minutes, which we all laugh at because 15 minutes for me is a pretty tight schedule. And I was asked to speak on how to deepen our relationship with God, and my aspect of that was intuition. So normally now I would be playing a video of Swamiji, but I'm going to play the talk that I gave at Spiritual Renewal Week, because there's some things I want to say that I didn't get to say. So let's have a look at it. Spiritual Renewal Week is family reunion. And when you see your family that you haven't seen in a while, you want to hug, right? So, let's have it. Come on. I'm serious. Yeah, get the arms out. Come on. Can you feel? Woo! Yeah. Okay, now, but I want you to feel me hugging you too. Now, if you'll go into hugging consciousness, close your eyes. Hugging isn't physical, it's your heart's energy flowing towards another being. It's also receiving the love, listening, receiving that love from that other being. Now let's add God's presence and God in the form of the Guru to that hug. And now God is loving God. We're perceiving that love. We're living in that love. We perceive it with the soul. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. मेरा नाम नायास्वामी विजय, मेरा घर नोएडा भारत में। अभी मैं बहुत खुश यहाँ to be. This is Hindi. This is my name is Nayaswami Vijay.
And my home now is in Noida, India. And I'm very happy here to be. The subject that I've been given is intuition. I was talking to my son, and my son Kai, whose real name is Kaivalya, the state of absolute oneness with God. I told him that subject was intuition and that I was, giving it some thought, trying to plan a little bit. He grew up here. He knew right away the mistake that I had made. So he said, "Dad, you're talking on intuition." I said, "Well, okay, but it's good to have a backup plan." So I do have a backup plan, just in case. So I need your help. I have a question. How many of you have had an experience of what you would describe as intuition? Raise your hand. Okay, almost everybody. Now, raise your hand again if you always have that experience. I'm the only one? Well, when we communicate, it's sometimes difficult to understand each other because we don't use the same words. We don't have the same definition of the words that we're using. So let's define a couple of words so that we can be sure that we're on the same page. So, what is God? God is everything. Yes? God, where is God? God is everywhere. God is also beyond everything and everywhere. Yes? Okay. So what is the soul? The soul, as Master described it, is individualized spirit. What is spirit? God. So we are all individualized spirit. And what that means is that we are God. How does that feel to be God? Does this feel like God? We're used to thinking that God is out there, but we are in here. We're individualized, and the soul has become identified with the body. The body is the covering of individualized spirit. So underneath the surface of what we experience is the soul. So if God is everything and everywhere, then this hand is God. I said, well, the hand of God? I don't think so. But the reality is that it's a part of God. It's not all of God. It's part of God. But what is the soul? The pure soul is all of God. But when it becomes individualized and identified with the ego personality and a body, it becomes limited. But that limitation doesn't mean that it's disconnected from that larger reality. It means that it can't perceive that larger reality. And the whole spiritual path, the whole experience that we have coming through the creation is going from an extremely limited ability to perceive God to the ultimate absolute perception of God. Intuition is the, excuse me, I think I need, this is God as old age. Intuition as Master described it, as the soul's power of knowing. So how does God know that God is God? Intuition. It's the direct perception of truth. Truth is that which exactly corresponds to reality. Reality is God. So when we describe all of intuition, we're describing the direct perception of all of God. But the soul's power of perception is stepped down, like an electronic transmission system, down into this form. But it doesn't stop becoming the soul's power of perception. It's just a very limited ability to perceive. And we've been given in the spiritual life very specific techniques to awaken this direct perception. We awaken it through all of the spiritual practices that we have. Most importantly, energization, Hong Sa practice, Om practice, and Kriya. These are powerful techniques. But remember, intuition, the very power to think, the very power to perceive through the physical body is activated by the power of intuition. It's just stepped down. So we, as the natural way that we are made, we perceive intuitionally, even though we've been hypnotized into thinking that we think through the brain, and that we need to use the sense organs in order to have perceptions. This is the hypnotic effect of Maya. We are spirit, and our way of perception is intuition. And we have become so attached to the body that we can't access that intuition consciously. As we meditate and as we practice going into stillness, deeper and deeper levels of stillness, we will perceive more and more directly and awaken our ability to perceive intuitively. So just by the very fact that we do these practices, we're automatically clearing our ability to perceive. But one of the things that holds us back the most is restlessness. The mind, you go to sit to meditate, we're restless. Do you remember the story of Sri Yukteswar meeting Babaji in the Autobiography of a Yogi underneath the banyan tree? And the thing is, now you have to give appreciation to Sri Yukteswar for playing this particular part. Because he's an avatar, he knows what's going on. But in that moment, in the play, he plays the part of, he saw Babaji, he got so excited. And then his cultural conditioning took over. Oh, I have to give a physical offering to Babaji. So he said, I've got to go get these sweets. So here's Babaji. And I got to go. I got to go get sweets. Well, when he came back, Babaji was gone. But then as the story unfolds, we later find out that Babaji wasn't actually gone. But his, Sri Yukteswar's ability to perceive Babaji's presence had dissolved because of restlessness. And later Babaji said, you veritably extinguished me in the ether because of your restlessness. We extinguish our ability to perceive God directly through intuitive perception because of the restless mind, because of the fact that we have become so habituated to living through the physical body. I think one of the greatest lessons and examples that I personally have received from association with Ananda and Kriyanandaji is watching Swamiji, and he talked about Master doing the same thing, and he did it. And of course, we've seen everyone else learning how to do it, is to recognize that in every moment of life, there is an opportunity to perceive God's presence. And the way that we do that is that we attune inwardly in that silent, calm center to spiritual, to God presence, to soul truth underneath the surface of all the ups and downs of daily life. So it doesn't matter what's going on out here, we connect in here. And over time, that connection becomes stronger and stronger until it becomes the natural way that life proceeds around you. I have 2 stories to tell in 3 minutes. So I think this was in the 90s. I had never been to the Seattle Center, and I had a reason to go up to Seattle. And so I went, and I decided that I didn't want to get a hotel room, so I would arrive at, like at midnight, 1 in the morning, and rent a car and sleep in the car in the parking lot of the center. And it was going to be Sunday, and then I'd go and clean up a little bit and go to Sunday service. Well, I forgot to find out where the center is. So I had no idea where it was, and I'm there at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm driving down the road in the rental car towards Seattle at the airport south of town, and I'm driving, and I'm thinking, okay, Divine Mother, what are we going to do? This relationship, this intuitive. So I'm driving down the road. This is called synchronicity. This is one of the ways that intuition manifests. So I'm driving down the road. I'm thinking, what do I do? I'm using my mind, but I'm also connecting, going, okay, we need to solve this. So I drove down the road for 20 or 30 minutes. I don't even know if I've gone through Seattle. I'm halfway to Canada. And I see a gas station. I think I'm going to go in there and look it up in the phone book, see if there's a map. Because there was no cell phones and GPS, all that stuff. So I go up, finally I see a station, but there's no exit. So I go up to the off-ramp, I get off, and then I turn back towards the station in a parallel road to the freeway. Now, I'd been looking for a gas station for some time. Finally, I found one. So I'm going through this business section, and the lights are on. It's the middle of the night. I'm looking. Ananda Center. What's the Ananda Center? I pulled into the parking lot. Thank you. So, I went to Swamiji's house when he was living in the dome at the Crystal Hermitage, before the Crystal Hermitage was there. It was just the dome. This was in the 70s. And he used to go into seclusion occasionally, and he would go into silence. And I was working at the publication building, and I knew that the mail would go down there once a day, and as often as possible, I would try to be the mailman. So one day, I'm the mailman, and I come down. You come in the door and stand in the entrance area, and eventually Swamiji will come up and take the mail. He won't speak, but he'll smile and give him the mail, and then you wait to see if he has any messages to come back. So I'm just meditating, enjoying. I just saw Swami. Oh, that's nice. And he comes back, and he hands me a piece of paper, and on this piece of paper is a drawing that I've never seen before, and it was my impression that this is the original version of the Ananda logo. And I wasn't very artistic-minded, and he's looking at me like, what do you think? And I'm thinking, I have no idea what I think. I don't know. So, I don't know. So I think he was a little disappointed, but, he would never, So he goes back to doing whatever he's doing. And I'm now meditating, and I'm going, oh, man, what was that? What was that? That's a little squiggly line, you know? But I know that there's something here. He wouldn't have shown it to me. So I just opened up. I calmed down. And in that moment of openness, it was just like blinders. When you just simply can't see, and the blinders came off, and I felt it. And where did I feel it? Here. I felt it. And that understanding, that intuitive understanding comes in the heart. You open your heart. Swamiji was the most open-hearted person I ever had the good fortune to spend time with. And his very name, Kriya, action, and Kriya, meditation, Ananda, bliss, Kriyananda. And his whole life was an example of how we should live open-hearted with joy, intuitively connected. This is our path. This is our spiritual family. Namaste.
That the way that I started that talk with the hug thing, the reason that I wanted people to do that, to actually experience it, is because hugging is one of the things that we do that is actively intuitive. If you're hugging somebody, you're not, touching them. Feeling their body isn't the point of it. The point of it is to inwardly radiate good feeling, and to receive at the same time. You have to be open to receiving from that other person. And this is how meditation works. This is how intuition works. This is really the basis. We often say, well, what is God's will? Or how can I live in harmony with God's will? You have to act and listen at the same time. It's a simultaneous process. You can't always just listen. You have to, as you're living, even as you're meditating, we're concentrating, we're trying to focus here at the spiritual eye and heart expansion, but we're also trying to receive. And eventually what we realize is that the very act of trying to do something is receiving the power of God to do that. We have no power of our own. There is no power that is separate from God. So this is, we receive the ability to be conscious from God, and we focus it on God, and it creates this simultaneous direction. So we're receiving and broadcasting at the same time. And eventually that the idea that receiving and broadcasting are separate, that dissolves as well. Because we recognize that God is one. God, the whole simultaneous creation is just happening now. So I did not plan for that person to walk up there. That was unexpected. But that concept that we're energy is flowing through us, and it's coming to us to flow through us. We do this in energization. This is why, one of the reasons why energization is so important. And Master said, if he was only given one technique and put onto a deserted island, he would want energization. Because from that you understand that life and meditation is the conscious act of receiving at will and sending at will. And that's a simultaneous process. So there was I know. I caught her looking at the clock. Okay, I'm going to save what I was going to say for another time. So anyway, that was one of the thoughts that I didn't have to share, but I think that it's a very important aspect of understanding intuition, and the very way that we perceive God's presence is through intuition. The power of the soul to perceive, that is intuition. The brain is not the origination point. The brain reflects the thoughts that have been received through intuition. It's a much larger subject. One of the speakers, Dr. Peter and Purushottama, they spoke on the scientific aspects of sort of the current scientific understanding about life and how the brain works and things like that. It's fascinating, but when you put the two together, you realize that the understanding that mankind had about how things are really working is changed dramatically in the last 20 years. And of course, modern science hasn't fully taken into account that the yogis of ancient times, they figured it out already. They just didn't print it in a book and save it for them to read. They passed it on from guru to disciple through the generations, and we've been given the blessing of receiving that line, that continuous transmission from the divine to understand how this process works, and then enter into it consciously if we're interested. So, Om.